What I want to do today is talk about what is the major objection to belief in God. Philosophers come up with a number of reasons for thinking that God doesn't exist, but the primary one throughout the ages and still today is what's called the problem of evil. The problem of evil can be expressed this way. If God is all good, if you believe God's all good, then he wants to prevent evil. What does it mean to be all good other than that you're against evil? If being good isn't the antithesis of evil, then what does the word good mean? So if you're all good, if you're perfectly good, as theists want to say, then you're against evil. But the second premise is that if God is all powerful, he's able to prevent evil. Christians believe, as well as most other theists today, that God is all powerful and all good. If he's all good, he wants to prevent evil. If he's all powerful, it seems he's able to prevent evil. What does it mean to be all powerful other than that you're able to do whatever you want? You have the power to do whatever you want. The problem is that evil exists. Evil exists in the world. And therefore, the conclusion seems that either God is not all good, or God is not all powerful, or there is no God at all. It's a pretty logical conclusion. It's a formally valid argument. If you accept the premises, it seems you have to accept the conclusion. Either he's not all good and he could prevent evil, but he doesn't want to, or he's not all powerful, he wants to prevent evil, but he's not able to, or he doesn't exist at all. Now, in response to this, I want to say one other thing about evil. As we're turning to this problem, I want us to feel the full gravity of this problem, because it's a huge one. It is, as I said, the major objection to belief in a personal God. That's why a lot of people believe that there might be a force out there with some kind of cosmic purpose, but whatever that force is, it's not very much interested in the affairs of human beings, because life here is very frequently nightmarishly painful. And so we need to appreciate the full gravity of this problem. Now, here's the thing about evil. I say that evil must be considered in the concrete. Here's what I mean by that. Philosophers argue a lot about the definition of evil. The standard one in the Western tradition is that it's the absence of good. St. Augustine kind of canonized that definition of evil. Evil is the absence of good. And while that has a certain amount of philosophical cash value, I want to submit to you that you don't grasp evil with an abstract definition. As long as you're talking about an abstract definition, you're not really talking about evil. You're talking about the definition of evil. Evil is something which you only encounter in its concrete form, just like with love. I can define love to you as love is ascribing unsurpassable worth to somebody. But that doesn't quite grasp it. To grasp the real reality of love, you have to be the object of love or be involved in love. So also with evil, to grasp the reality of evil, you have to consider it in a concrete form. And so I like us as we're going through this. Because see, what happens is that many times I think people accept abstract definitions of evil which don't really grasp the reality of evil, and for that reason we accept shallow, cliché explanations for evil. And we need to grapple with this issue more seriously than that. So I want to take a concrete illustration of evil. I use this one in my book, God at War. It's a true account told by a historian, Joseph Friedman, who was a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto during the Nazi occupation of Poland. And he recounts this episode where in one of the Nazi gatherings, he used to go throughout the town and gather people to put them on the train to send them to Auschwitz or whatever, or sometimes just to take account of where they were. In one of their gatherings, two Nazi soldiers noticed this beautiful little girl named Zosia. And they noticed her beautiful eyes, and they began to joke about how beautiful her eyes were. One of them made a comment, but that they looked like jewels. And the other one said, well, if they're jewels, we should maybe take them home to our lovely wives. And then the Nazi guards proceeded to pin her to the ground, this little 5-6-year-old girl, and pluck her eyes out with their bare hands. As a crowd of people stood around, held back by guards, the mother of this lady going insane, and the guards were laughing as they were doing it. The girl and others were screaming. Some were calling on God. And Joseph Friedman ends this account by saying, one wondered whether what God would hear first, the cries and the prayers or the laughter. What would he respond to? And we need to enter into, however you define evil, that's evil. And to say that that's the absence of good doesn't quite capture it. Something more sinister, diabolical was incarnated there. So the question is, was God able to prevent Zosha from getting her eyes plucked out? And later on, she was exported to Auschwitz and incinerated. Was God able to prevent that but just didn't want to? Or did he want to stop that but wasn't able to? Those are kind of your options. Or maybe there is no God at all. That's the problem of evil. It's the problem of Zosha. It's always concrete. It's not the problem in the abstract, the absence of good. It's the problem of this little kidnapped child, this little kid getting their eyes plucked out, this person being murdered, this person being raped, this country being bombed. It's always concrete, and we need to keep it concrete. We need to do our theology with our eyes unflinchingly on the worst-case scenario that the world has to offer. Think about that. If our theology is to be real and true, it's got to be reconciled with reality, and this is part of reality. If we do our theology with our heads stuck in the ground, pretending like the world is a little la-la land, or at least not as barbaric as it actually is, then we're doing our faith inauthentically, you see. It happens quite often that people come to wrestle with the problem of evil when something terrible happens to them. I dealt with a student one time when I was teaching at Bethel who was actually always resisting me in my class in theology as I was kind of talking about how people have free will, and I'll get into my own theology a little bit later on this. But she was saying, no, God controls everything, every detail, even the evil things God controls. And she was very insistent on it, we had a good discussion throughout the class. About 2 years later, she called me up and wanted to talk with me, and what had happened was her father, who she loved and respected, and he was a deacon in the church, whatever, had been caught having a long-term affair with his secretary, and once caught, he divorced his wife and moved out with this other woman. And this to this young lady was just catastrophic. How could this be? And now she asked the question, how could this in any sense be God's will? Now, I tried to talk with her, and her faith was actually completely crumbled because all of her eggs were in this one basket. Her faith was identical with this omni-controlling God, and so when she could no longer believe that, then the Christian faith was no longer valid. So I was trying to help pick up the pieces. But one part of me was asking this question: how did it take you going through a relatively minor tragedy in your life? I mean, on the painometer of the cosmos, having your dad, turn out to be less heroic than you thought he was, and having leave your family, that's bad. That really is bad. It's painful. I don't want to minimize that, but it's not quite the same as having your little child kidnapped or having your eyes, watching your little daughter get her eyes plucked out. But how did it take this happening to you personally before you came to really grapple seriously with this question?